today I actually want to tell you a story, one of my favorite stories, especially when I was a kid. And the name of the story is Stone Soup. And I want to know if anybody's ever heard this story, Stone Soup. Give me a thumbs up. It's okay if you haven't. So I'm going to tell it to you, and you're going to help me to tell the story. And just to tell the story a little better, I've got some props here. But don't get too excited, everybody. I have a pot. But let me tell you the story and let's find out why. So a long time ago, there were some men who were traveling. They were coming back after a war. And they had been fighting in this war. And they were so tired, and they were ready to go home. And they were also hungry. And they had nothing. They had no money to buy food. And so they came into a village. And as they came into the village, they thought, let's ask these people if they can help us because we're hungry. As they came into the village, though, the villagers, the people living there, looked out, and they saw these strangers coming. And they thought, we're a little scared. I don't know that we have enough. They might take what we have. And so do you know what they decided to do? They hid all the food that they had, even if they had just a little. They decided to hide it. They hid it under their beds, in their cellars, under blankets. And then when these men came to the door, they said, with their saddest faces, I'm so sorry, we have nothing for ourselves and nothing for you. So these men, they went out into the middle of the village, and they had an idea. And one of them said, good people, come on out, come into the middle of the village. I have an idea. And one of them said, I hear that you don't have enough, that you don't have food, but I am going to make you stone soup. Now, if you're hearing this, you might be thinking what the villagers were. What in the world is stone soup? So they were interested. And so the stranger said, I have this pot. Someone come bring me a pot, actually, he asked. And someone brought him a pot. And he put some water in the pot. And then he said, okay, the main ingredient. Do you know what the main ingredient in stone soup is? What do you think? Stones, there you go. So I've got a couple of stones. I'm going to put them in here. And he started to heat up the soup. And then as he did that, he said, you know, this is really wonderful soup, but it would be even better with salt and pepper. And someone said, I have salt and pepper, it just so happens. And she ran home and she brought it back. And then he added it to the soup, okay? And then he said, you know, this is wonderful soup, but it would be even better if we had some carrots. Does anyone happen to have any carrots out there? Oh, no way. You brought carrots with you? Okay, well, would you come on and bring them up and put them in my soup, please? That's amazing that you brought some carrots with you. I love it how this works out. Okay, so he added the carrots. Thank you so much for your generosity. Okay, you can go back and sit down. And then he asked, okay, well, this would be even better with potatoes. Does anyone out there happen to have any potatoes? You have potatoes? Could you bring some potatoes and put them in my soup? Okay. All right. Thank you, Helene. All right, so he added the potatoes to the soup. And as you can imagine, the soup is starting to get a little more fragrant and a little more appealing. But he said, you know, does anyone have anything else they could add to the soup? And so my cooks out there, anything, I know you might not have some onions in your purse or something, but would anyone like to pretend to add something to my soup? What do you think? What would you add? Need? Chicken. That is a fantastic idea. Chicken. Anything else? What would be good in a soup? What do you think? Maybe some pasta? Broccoli is a wonderful idea, Rush. Thank you. Okay. And more potatoes, like maybe sweet potatoes, right? We could add more. Well, people began to discover that they had more and more things, right? And they wanted to add them to the soup. Well, finally, the man who was cooking the soup, he said, it's ready. And at this point, the village was becoming really excited, okay? They knew this soup was going to be good. Do you know what they decided to do? They decided to have a party. So everyone got big tables, and they lit some torches, and they decorated, and people brought bread, maybe dessert, and they had a feast. And they weren't expecting this at all. It was a surprise. But because of a stranger, they had the best feast they'd ever had. Well, I hope you like that story. I don't know what you think about the villagers when you hear that story. When I first heard that story, I thought they were a little silly because they had to be tricked into making this party, right? They had to be tricked into making a soup that could feed everyone. And I thought they were a little sad because they seemed like they felt a little alone and maybe scared. Well, today you're going to hear some verses from the Bible, from the book of Ephesians. The letter that Paul wrote to the Ephesians. And in those verses, they tell us that Jesus Christ is the head of the church. And it even says that Jesus can change all of us, okay, from the inside in our hearts, so that we can start to be together, almost like one body, almost like we're functioning as one body. He uses kind of that idea, that image. And that's because Jesus is the one who shows us what it means to trust and to be generous. Because it was Jesus, you see, who came and gave up everything he had. He left heaven and he came to be with us and to die for us so that we could be invited into God's beautiful village. And in fact, even better than that, we could become like sons and daughters, like God's family. And so, you see, as a church, I want you guys to know this, and you're part of the church. Because, see, you're part of that body. So even as kids, you're part of that church. Jesus gives us the ability to come together, to trust one another, even to welcome in people who are strangers, who are different from us, to be generous with one another, and to love one another. And that is a great promise that Jesus does that. So when you hear the story of stone soup, and I know you might not eat stone soup, but if you're ever eating a different kind of soup, I hope you'll remember that Jesus helps us be like the villagers at the end of that story, okay? And enjoy a feast together, caring for one another and loving one another as a community.